Good evening, everyone.
Good morning.
Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for the chairman to arrive so we can start the meeting. Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening.
We are all set to start when you are, sir.
Very good. Welcome to the 905th meeting of the directors of MSAD number 27. Roll call, please.
Keith Jandro.
Here.
Isabel Lozier.
Here.
Abby Pooler.
Here.
Sarah Ashley.
Here.
Toby Jandro.
Here.
Leroy McKenzie. And Gary Sibley. We do have a quorum, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think you're on mute right now.
We have adjustments to the agenda under new business.
Yeah, we do have one adjustment. Do have just a brief adjustment. I'm sharing my screen right now. Under new business, new hires, we're going to add an item 3, VRMS CHS assistant theater coach. This was something that was added to the bargaining agreement this year.
Very good. Do we need a motion?
We'll take one.
We have a motion to add under new business, new hires, add item 3.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Sarah, seconded by Abby. Any discussion? We're going to do a roll call vote. Toby? You're on mute.
Approve.
Sarah?
Approve.
Ms. Fuller?
Approved.
Ms. Lozier?
Approved.
Vote is unanimous. Moving on. Period of public participation.
Mr. Chairman, I'm monitoring the chat right now, and right now there are no comments in the chat. I can continue to monitor throughout the meeting and see if somebody wants to address the board, and then we can take it up at that time. But right now there is nothing.
Do we have a motion to move the period of public participation to the end of the meeting, seeing as we have none at this moment? Somebody care to make that motion?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Who made the motion? Ms. Fuller? Toby seconded. All in favor? Isabel Ozier?
Approved.
Ms. Fuller?
Approved.
Ms. Ashley?
Yep.
Mr. Jandro?
Yes.
Unanimous. Very good. We will move the period of public participation to the end of the meeting. Moving forward, approval of the meeting minutes of meeting 904 on December 8th.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Toby, seconded by Ms. Lozier. Any discussion? Very good. Ms. Lozier, in favor? I know this is kind of a pain, but we're going to have to do the roll call vote. Ms. Lozier,
Approved.
Ms. Fuller,
Approved.
Ms. Ashley,
Yes.
Mr. Jandro.
Sounds good.
Very good. Minutes are approved. Moving on to the approval of the financial statements. Item A, November 2021. Motion to approve. Is
So moved.
that Ms. Lozier?
Second.
It was me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Very good. Motion by Ms. Fuller, seconded by Ms. Ashley. Any discussion? Very good. Mr. Jandro,
I approve.
Mrs. Ashley,
Approve.
Mrs. Fuller, Ms. Fuller,
Approved.
Ms. Lozier.
Approved.
Very good. November 2021 financial statements approved unanimously. Under item 5, D, 2020-2021 audit reports. We have a motion to accept.
We do have
So
Lucy
moved.
here who may want to just share a few items of information. Lucy,
Okay,
did you want to share anything?
Yeah, I can. If you looked at the document that we emailed to you, on page 9, you'll see the unassigned balance that we carried forward. which was 938,148. We also carried forward a school lunch balance of about 44,000 and a continuing ed balance of 86,000. So those three items are $1,068,000. We used 880 of it as a carry forward to offset taxes in this year's budget. So we carried forward enough to what we had planned. And again, this year, it was a successful audit with no findings.
Very good. Did we have a motion to approve the audit report?
So moved.
Mr. Jandro made a motion. Second? Who has a second?
Second. I'll second.
Ms. Ashley? Any further discussion? Any questions for Ms. Tabor? Seeing none? Mr. Jandro, how do you vote?
Approve.
Ms. Lozier?
Approve.
Mrs. Ashley?
Approve.
And Ms. Fuller?
Approved.
All in favor, motion passes. Okay, number 6, superintendent.
First thing I'm going to update you on is the most recent change to our standard operating procedure. I will share my screen. I'm not going to go over the entire document because a lot of it is similar to what we know to exist in the SOP. I did highlight a couple of things that were minor changes. Some were major, but some were minor. On page 1 of the document, advise close contacts to seek a COVID-19 test 5 days following the exposure. The previous version of this did not state this advisement. It was assumed, but it wasn't stated. So they did put that in the new SOP. So after your 5 day, at 5 days following your close contact exposure, the school nurse should be advising students and staff to get a test. So that's something new. On page 2 to page 3, if a student, teacher, or staff has access to a test and wants to test during isolation, the best approach is to use an antigen test. So they just have some information there about some testing protocols. We do accept tests from home. So if a student or a staff member is testing from home and receives a positive result, we ask that they contact the school nurse with that information. We are accepting that. There's some language about mask wearing when returning from an isolation or close contact period. The previous SOP alluded to the fact that you needed to mask for the additional 5 days. Now it states it, and the school has a plan for ensuring that those students have their mask. For us, that's a moot point. We're all masked universally, so we already have a universal plan for masking. But in the event that if we ever go to an optional mask, any student who is returning from isolation, student or staff, would have to wear the mask 5 days after their required isolation period. So that's in there as well. Same thing for when there's mask breaks indoors. We have to make sure that anyone who has returned from isolation or as a close contact has a plan to make sure that they have adequate distance when taking off their mask for eating and for any mask break. So we have that in place as well. Those close contacts who are enrolled in the pool testing program may continue to attend school. So that's something that we have in play that's been in existence anyway, because we've had pool testing. So that's exists as well. They've changed their definition of outbreak response. In the past, the old definition was 3 or more confirmed positives from different families. And now it's strictly a 15% absenteeism rule. So if we have 15% of our staff and or students out due to COVID-related illness, our school nurses are reporting that to the Maine CDC, and we would receive an outbreak status. As I made the board aware earlier this morning, last Friday, we were notified that CHS between Thursday and Friday, we did have a spike in positive cases after our pool testing came in, and we did slightly exceed the 15% threshold, and we were at 15.08. So technically we are on monitor for outbreak status for the next 14 days. Nurse Monique will be reporting our daily numbers to the Maine CDC. Those are pretty much the highlighted changes for the SOP, and I'll take any questions that the board might have. No questions? I can go on to the next agenda item, which is the Osha Rule. The Osha Rule, of course, was part of an announcement made by the Biden administration earlier this fall, trying to get those states who do follow the Osha Rule to have large employers, any employer that has 100 or more employees, require their employees to get vaccinated or enroll in serial COVID-19 testing. This went through the court process. It went through some different stays through the courts. It ended up in the Supreme Court. And then on January 13, the Supreme Court granted the request to stay OSHA's ability to implement and enforce ETS. So basically, because of that stay, the requirement is not going to be applied. So right now, because of that stay, we are not enacting what was described under the OSHA ETS rule to mandate COVID-19 vaccines or serial testing. Until that changes, we will wait and see whatever advice we get. We've been getting some regular updates from our legal counsel on this, so we feel that we're well versed on it, and we've been following it. Right now, because of the stay, as I said, there is no movement to move forward with that mandate. Any questions on that from the board? Before I turn this over to Dr. Hart to give us an update on Northern Maine Medical and anything else going on regionally with COVID-19, I did want to let the board members know that we did receive 2 cards from staff members thanking you, the board, for both the hazard pay that the staff received right before the holidays, and also the December 21 early release that you decided to change to a full workshop day. We had staff members that appreciated that and sent cards to the board on that note. So just wanted to let you all know. That being said, I will turn things over to Dr. Hart to give us an update from her.
So the first question that I had specifically asked to me, so I wanted to answer it, is the news about the CDC's backlog of testing in the state and what that might mean for us. Nursing staff who's doing the pool testing for the schools does report that oftentimes there will be a delay, and specifically it's been as late as Friday on one occasion for them to get their pool testing results. In which case it's very difficult to scramble to get the antigen testing done. Other than that, it doesn't impact us locally as much because the hospital has, compared to our population we serve, a decent amount of PCR and antigen testing available. So talking to my colleagues downstate, they have to wait 5-9 days for any kind of test. and it's difficult to obtain. And here I have not heard of major issues obtaining a test when needed. So it hasn't impacted us greatly. If it impacts us at all, it would be those pool testing that the nurses are doing. In terms of what's going on at the hospital, most of what we're impacted now with COVID is the large amount of volume of COVID downstate, which limits our ability to transfer patients to tertiary care facilities when they need a higher level of care. So right now, a third of the patients currently in Maine Medical Center, or sorry, in Northern Maine, admitted on the adult side, not the OB side. A third of them are awaiting transfer. And it's been as bad as somebody being admitted and waiting 9 days for a transfer for surgery that they needed elsewhere. We had a young person who had a decent sized heart attack who waited 3 days for a transfer. So those are the biggest impacts that we're seeing medically. And then staffing has been an issue with the number of staff that have been out. So last week we had to decrease the amount of elective surgeries. We did not have to cancel all of them, but we had to delay some. And we're kind of, we've had to scramble sometimes to find adequate staff. So the reason we decreased the elective surgeries is to pull those nurses to help on the floors, for example. And we were concerned it would keep ramping up, but it seems to be steady state. So we get people back from quarantine at about the same rate that they're going out, at least for now. In terms of something that has been a big question from the nursing staff and from parents and our patients over the last few weeks since the change in isolation guidelines came out is what to do about our athletes. So because of the guidance for athletes changing after the isolation guidelines changed, that's been a source of confusion for many parents. If you guys have heard about that, I can explain a little bit more. Essentially, the kids with mild to asymptomatic COVID who in the past were not allowed to do their return to play protocol for 10 days, cardiology and the others around the state, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the main branch, wanted us to keep that until they heard from pediatric cardiology and sports medicine, etc. So the national AAP has not yet weighed in on this, to my knowledge, but we got word after like last Friday that, or Monique would know, like I'm getting my Fridays mixed up, honestly, that it's now 5 days. As long as they are cleared to return to school, they can return to play gradually as long as they wear their mask 100% of the time for that second 5 days post-COVID time frame. So that's been a source of a lot of confusion and some angry parents. So you guys, if you've heard about that, that's what happened. Right now, if the national AAP comes out with something different, we're going to change again, and I'm just waiting for that to happen. Hopefully they won't. In terms of effect on kids, we haven't seen any transfers that I'm aware of for kids with COVID, but we have had, I've had an 18-year-old in my practice with long COVID, probably can't go back to college this semester. And at Fish River, there's been a 13-year-old, 15-year-old that have long COVID symptoms, enough to come see us. So it's not as much as the adults, which is good, but it's still there, especially for the older kids. The younger kids tend to be better.
Thank you, Dr. Hart. Any questions from the board for Dr. Hart? I will just follow up with what Dr. Hart was talking about with the return to play protocols. You know, several of the parents were looking towards, looking for some kind of written guidance on this. And it's not in the SOP, and it's not, you know, it's not somewhere where you can easily point to. We were able, though, to reference the MPA's return to winter sports protocols, and it does have a section that says, the athlete should work with their PCP on a gradual return to play plan. And that's basically what we've been saying. Work with your PCP, and your PCP will tell you exactly what that return to play plan is. So that that is at least something that we can point to. Final thing under superintendent is the administrator's reports, and you should have a report from Mr. Doucette, Mr. Anderson, and Anne Marie as well. So if you have any questions, they are in the Zoom room, and you can feel free to ask them any questions about that. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, under superintendent.
Thank you. Item 7, committee reports. A, policy committee.
So the
Item
first,
I.
the first one we have is the second read of policy BHC, board relationships and communication with staff. And that is something I can put on my screen as well. And I did also share with the board the section from the Maine School Management Association, section 9, board relationships with staff. Essentially, the policy here shadows what the MSSA handbook says with regards to the appropriate chain of command, if you will, or the flow of communication, not only on the relationship front from, the board and superintendent relationships, board and principal, board, teachers, and school employees, but also, how to communicate with staff, and essentially, utilizing that chain of command when discussing with staff, discussing those things with staff. So this is a second read. I don't know if the board wants to discuss further. I'll open it up to the board.
I take issue only because this came to us because of 20 MRSA section 1001 subsection 21, which you shared with us last meeting, Ben.
Yeah.
Which was I'll just read it because I don't think it's in this month's materials, but basically, communication with school employees and the public. The school board shall regularly communicate with school employees and the school board's school administrative unit and members of the public who reside within the boundaries of the school administrative unit. The legislature has come down and said that. It's strange to me that the policy that came from that is we are not to do those things. Or we don't actually do them ourselves. We delegate that out. I think talking to members of the public and alerting them to where the chain of command is. I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, well, let me fix that for you. I don't think that's my job. But I think if somebody wants to come up to me and say, I've got this issue, as a board member, I should listen and then direct them to the proper person to go to. And I think asking people, how are you feeling? How are you doing is an important part of our job. Otherwise, we're nothing more than a rubber stamp who signs the budget every year. And I don't necessarily want to be that. So I don't care much for this policy. I think it relegates us to a closet somewhere. And given that we're elected by folks in the community, I think we should be talking to them and knowing where the line is. I think it'd be more beneficial for us to discuss where we go if somebody comes to us and says, I can't believe this has happened. And we can say, you should go talk to the vice principal. You should go talk to the principal. Have you talked to the principal? No. Well, then you should. Have you talked to the principal? Yes. And he's a jerk. Well, you should go talk to Ben. That's the next person up the chain of command. I don't think we can expect the public to just automatically know where to go. And if they come to us, I'd hate to say no. That's where
Is this one, Toby, that you would recommend we bring to the policy committee to just go through with a fine tooth comb and bring something that's more appropriate? This is a
I don't know, what
boiler.
does everybody else think?
I think
Sarah, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
all I said was that I think that makes sense for it to go to the policy committee to look at.
I would agree too. I don't think it can hurt to go through it in committee and just find it a little bit more appropriate, especially with what Toby's saying. I agree with that.
My only question is there anything that explicitly states that we cannot communicate with staff in this policy?
It doesn't state that you cannot, it just kind of outlines the appropriate way to do so. And I think, forgive me for probably misinterpreting this, but I think this has to do a lot with how accessible board members are nowadays with social media, with all the different ways that folks can communicate with you. It's not, digging up your name in a phone book and trying to call you anymore. It's, what's your Snapchat? What's your Facebook chat? So you're easily accessible. And I think, we've seen some glimmers of this recently where some staff will send messages to some of you, but not all of you, in an effort to kind of get the opinion of those they believe sway one way or the other. And I think that's kind of where things get a little bit, not dangerous, but things get a little bit cloudy on where the line is. If the board is well versed, like Toby was saying, in how to redirect staff, I've got no problem with maybe having some kind of discussion about that, of what are the right things that we do that all the time as administrators, how to do that. But what the board does not want to do is have a direct line to a staff member or vice versa. And that could be problematic. So for what it's worth.
I just, Keith, to your question, I mean, the first page, it says all communication or reports to the board or to any committee of the board from school principals, supervisors, teachers, or other employees shall be submitted through the superintendent. And if you go down to board and teachers and other school employees, it says direct access between the employees and the board may be obtained through channels established for grievances through applicable board policies. And then at the last one, it says communication with staff, the responsibility of the board as a whole. Individual board members should refrain from initiating communications or conversation with staff members on their own. I mean, that's short of an absolute prohibition. I've gone up to staff and said, how are things feeling? Because I really just want to know. And I would hate to feel like that's some sort of violation of policy, especially given that the legislation was so exactly the opposite of what this policy says. But we can send it back to committee. I'm fine with that. I think that might be, we can find an appropriate balance here, because I think this is way too far in one direction.
Yeah, and that will
Much
give
too
me
prohibitive.
time to maybe look at some other examples that maybe other school districts have adopted. Maybe there's something out there. This is just a boilerplate.
I agree. Let's send it back to committee.
Done. The other policies under committee report, we do have first reads. Policy BCB, which is board member conflict of interest, and BCC nepotism. They're both, the changes are both related to, I'm going to share my screen here. To a change in the law. This is prohibited appointments and employment. Section 1002. Essentially, what the legislature has done is put some language that is to be repealed in 2024. It's saying that the school board may, it's not required to, permit the spouse of a member of a school board to serve as a stipend employee on a contractual basis when that action is in the best interest of students. So essentially, because of the shortage of volunteers and stipend position individuals, this gives a grace period until July 1st, 2024, where we could allow for the spouse of a staff member to be a stipend employee and also a volunteer, as long as they're not directly reporting to an administrator in charge, is basically how it's worded. So in the proposed policies, for example, proposed policy BCB, I included some optional language to meet the intent of the law. If you so choose to adopt that, we can have that language that will allow us to hire one of your spouses as a stipend individual or a volunteer without being in a conflict of interest. And also with the nepotism policy, that same or very similar language is also optional and would allow for that as well. You currently have a policy BCB in place. So this one would replace your current board member conflict of interest. You do not have a nepotism policy in place, but it essentially, it outlines the same information. So this is just a first read. It's food for thought. You can adopt that optional language or not, but because of the change in law, it is recommended we update those policies. Discussion?
I feel like having more opportunity for people to help out is a good thing.
Not a bad thing. And to be fair, I mean, some of your spouses already volunteer, and we're not looking to, turn anyone away. We want to make sure that, we're doing right by the policy. I would recommend that if you have that option to allow one of your spouses to do so and they want to, why wouldn't you do it? But I'll let you think about it, and next meeting we can discuss whether or not to adopt the optional language.
Yeah, I see no reason not to. I mean, we're short as it is, and I think by virtue of our significant others being involved in our lives, because we're on the board, they kind of are probably more aware of the needs of the school than most of the public are. So I agree.
Any other discussion, board members? The last, oh, go ahead, Keith.
Well, I'm a little bit apprehensive. I mean, I understand we need everybody we can to help out and volunteer and fill in as needed, but I think we need to set some sort of terms or some sort of, we need to put something in place to where whoever we do bring in understands where the line is and how there can be an appearance of conflict of interest on our part. So how we go about that, I leave that up to you, Ben, to decide as far as hiring on an individual on a stipend basis. So that's where I stand.
And the sample policy does have some language about ensuring that the volunteer or the stipend person is not reporting directly to an administrator. I think that's the check and balance right there. Once they're reporting directly to an administrator, then they have access to administration in a way that may be a conflict of interest. So being a volunteer that does not report, so not being the chair of this or the head of this organization, I think would be the right way to go about it.
Sounds good.
The last policy I have for you as a first read has come about because of our recent food service. We had not an investigation, but an annual review or a regular review of the food service nutrition program. The report coming back from that review was stellar. Melanie has done a great job in making sure that our food service program is running to the letter of the law. They did notice, though, that our student wellness policy was last updated on May 7, 2018, and it does call for this to be reviewed every 3 years. So we're a little bit behind on the review. I did an overwrite on the copy you have of our current policy. They just seem to move things from one place to another. So not huge changes, but they do require that we do have that review and update that in our policy. And they're asking that we have that in place as part of the review process by June 30. So I'll let you take a look at that first read. It does talk about a wellness committee that a board member should be a part of. That was not part of the original policy, so that might be something that we need to add to our list of committees. Having a board member on the wellness committee, typically meet once a year to go over this policy and the procedures we have in school. So we can discuss that later once the policy is adopted, but no huge changes in that. I just realized I was discussing that and I wasn't sharing my screen, so I apologize.
Any questions for Ben regarding student wellness? Moving on, old business, MSAD27 board planning discussion. This is a recurring agenda item. Underneath that item is Valley Unified.
So we did have a Valley Unified board meeting January 12, and the board was discussing the interlocal agreement. And the board members in attendance agreed to take back the conversation to each SAU school board, just to get some further clarification so that your representatives know exactly what we want from SAD27. The first thing that we discussed was the term. As you know, the current term in the interlocal agreement is for 25 years. In my recommendation to the Valley Unified Board, it was recommended to reduce to 5-year terms. We had some great discussion during that VU board meetings, and shorter terms were discussed. We were able to have Lucy weigh in a little bit and Giselle talk about, the difficulty of getting out of a relationship without a proper time. And so our recommendation was no less than 2 years. We prefer 3 or longer, but no less than 2 years. And that's something that Toby and Keith, who were there, wanted to take back to this board to talk about that term limit. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, all are better than 25 years. And just so the board knows, SAD33 and Madawaska were very much open to a shorter term as well. They didn't believe that 25 years was in anyone's best interest. So I'll open the floor to the board to discuss the term.
Just to follow up on what Ben said, our partners in Valley Unified were very open-minded and flexible, I would think, as far as the term and readjusting the term and makeup of the board as well. Something else we need to bring up. I didn't see, I don't know, Toby, maybe you can correct me on this, but we didn't necessarily nail down a set term. I think 3 years is fair, considering the administration's request. I think that gives everybody plenty of time. And if we were to exit the current agreement after 3 years, there would be no reason why we couldn't work out some arrangement to where we still provide some services, as we have other districts in the past, or other school entities, other school units outside of our district. So, Toby, if you want to just add to that, I think personally 3 years is a good term to shoot for, and I think our other parties in the Valley Unified would also agree.
I think from my perspective, Ben made a really good distinction at the last meeting. There's a difference between the term and the opt-out period. And not because prior to it was there was always the opt-out, but it was so difficult that unless everybody agreed, nobody could get out. So we ended up kind of talking about both and conflating them, I think, quite a bit in the meeting. I don't think I didn't walk away feeling clear that everybody was necessarily on the same page with this stuff. I think we were all in the same direction. But some of the discussion we had was kind of isolating that which could be separated out from that which would be more difficult. And we talked to Lucy about that, and Giselle, just, what are the contracts we have that's 2 or 3 years? What are the contracts we have that renew every year? And I think with an eye to that, and if, I guess from my perspective, I had no issue with, I think the second part of the meeting where we talked about how we vote and how our votes matter and how we weigh the votes, I think really come in harder than anything else. Because ultimately it may be that we want to share services through Valley Unified, maybe not as many, but there may be some that we want to keep. There are some that were highlighted that we get funding from the state to do, and those I think we'd be foolish not to continue to use. But the ones that we're doing because we want to, we may want to exercise a little more autonomy. So to a hard and fast date, I think I'm more inclined to go with 2 with an asterisk, saying that if we need a third year to extract, if a party needs a third year to extract itself from a particular piece, then they either pay for it or they take that year. I mean, I guess there's multiple ways we can do that. I think the sooner everybody feels like they can come and go as they please, the more inclined everyone is to work together. I have to say that was the best meeting we'd had in a long time. Valley Unified, I felt like I was working with people who were partners, whereas up to then it always felt a little antagonistic.
That's
So,
because you compared yourself to a cat in a box, and it opened up everyone's mind.
That was the best metaphor I've ever come up with in my life. So, and I think it was apt. So I think, it felt better, and I felt like at the beginnings of when we were doing Valley Unified, where maybe we could figure something out for the first time in a long time. And I'll say that I'm generally not an optimist, but I walked out of that meeting feeling much more like I was heard and was much more open to listening than I have been in the past. So, for what it's worth.
One thing we are compiling at the request of the Valley Unified Board is how long are our contracted terms right now. So our contracted positions, our software licenses. So that's something that we're going to be presenting to the Valley Unified Board when we meet again, just so that they have an understanding of how hard it is to sever ties when all of these things have been merged. So just so you have that information. Any other thoughts for Keith and Toby about term?
I'd like to hear what other people have to say, even if I have to call on them.
Sarah, aside from Toby and I, you've been here a while. You've seen a few things. What are your thoughts?
I'm glad to hear that things were, it was a smoother meeting, a more unified kind of working together meeting. As far as whether it's 2, 3, 5, I guess I don't have a super strong opinion one way or the other. I think maybe it's more important that everybody feels more agreed upon on it. And, you know, I think what Toby was saying earlier makes sense with, you know, it's gonna need to reflect contracts. I mean, if a lot of our value unified services are 2-year contracts or 3-year contracts or whatever it is, there has to be the time to be able to prepare it, to get in, to get out, to find replacements, whatever that needs to be. So I feel like the number doesn't matter as much as that grace period of how you make it work. I know that's not super helpful, but
Those are details that can be worked out in the ILA.
Right.
I think what Toby and I and Gary need for our next meeting is normally we just get recommendations and we really don't nail down a bow on anything. And I don't think we need to nail down specifics, but I think it would be a good idea to go in there with an idea of, you know, maybe we want to go in and set a minimum of 2 years with no more than however much. And we work with our partners from there, because you know, I got the same takeaway as from Toby and Ben from the last meeting, is they want to work with us. And the tone was very good at our last meeting, and I'm very hopeful. So Toby, if you have any ideas for a motion that we ought to make, now would be the time.
Maybe move my big dog's head out of the way. How about I move to approve a reduction in the period from the current amount to somewhere between 2 and 3 years.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Fuller, second. Toby made the motion. Any discussion? Ms. Lozier, we haven't heard from you. Any thoughts on this process?
I think what you guys all said is good. I mean, like Sarah said, it's important to have that grace period where you can have that decision. As long as as long as you guys are working together well, I think the other little pieces can be worked out.
I guess my concern with having it so defined is, what if somebody else comes back and feels very strongly about 4, like super strongly? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, does it matter? And maybe it does, but I guess that's, I feel weird about like setting such a narrow, but again, I'm not the one that's meeting. So I feel I don't want to pigeon you guys into something so small that we create animosity by negotiating something.
Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the meeting, the other 2 schools, the other 2 units were bouncing even the word 1 around at one point. I mean, it wasn't, nobody was like really excited about a long-term commitment. I think what reeled us in was Lucy and Giselle. I think the various other entities were kind of fell into my analogy. You know, it's really hard to put a cat in a box, but if you leave a box on the floor, the cat will probably go in. And that maybe we'd all cooperate better if we could just go into the box instead of being put into the box. I think that was the idea. So, you know, 1 year and we go at it, that was actually bounced around at one point, not just by me, but it was echoed by somebody from Frenchville and somebody from Madawaska. So I don't know, Sarah, if that's a concern that I don't know how concerned I am with that. But I'll leave it to Keith to see what his thoughts are.
Okay, so I guess that's then the point is I don't want to make the box too small, right? But by making it such a tight fit. I know cats are pretty incredible though.
Well, I guess I would say if I just don't understand, I guess I don't understand. Do we want to just make it 1 to 4 years?
No.
Well, first of all, we have a motion on the floor, so let's get through this motion. And actually, the only thing I want to add to this, and the reason why I was personally apprehensive of going down to 1, is just because of the initial recommendation of administration to go no less than 2 years, and the, I guess, certainty that may be needed for certain people, and knowing that what's going to be in place is going to be in place for a set amount of time. I don't think 2 to 3 years is reasonable. And I didn't walk away from our Valley Unified meeting thinking that our partners were dead set on 1 year agreements either. I just think when you're only planning 1 year at a time, and when you're battling 1 budget season at a time, we need some certainty when planning for the future. That's where I'm really apprehensive about going down to just 1 year, even though, yes, can bill other parties for services provided if they so desire to continue. But I really think we ought to go no less than 2 years. That's my thought. Anybody else have anything to add?
I don't know if it's helpful for me to just kind of, Toby mentioned it earlier. We have to really separate what term means versus what withdrawal means, right? So for me, and maybe that's something we're going to have to define in the ILA, term means this is the term we agree to share these services. So we have these slate of services. We agree to share these services for 2 years or 3 years, whatever you decide. That means you're not going to dismantle those services in that term until we revisit it again, until the next term. Withdrawal is a whole other conversation. It's we want to get out, and that I think has its own complexities. So when we talk about term, we're just talking about these are our services. We agree to share these for X amount of years, if that's helpful.
I think so, and I think Lucy at our Valley Unified meeting, or was it Giselle, offer up a couple of examples of, I believe maybe it was our school that we shared with our partners, and a few other items which are multi-year contracts with the service provider. Either one of you could maybe just give us a brief example.
One
Yeah,
was cyber technologies.
There's several that are in the same boat. We have the financial system, we have the time clock system, we have the curriculum piece. We have the Power School, which is the student database. Those items took more than 1 year. Some are 2.5, 3 years before we were able to combine them successfully. And we're still tweaking how best they work. So to turn around and dismantle even as simple as just a shared service that one district may no longer want, is a really tremendous amount of work. And what we want to ensure as we're doing this is that we leave the three districts in a really good position that they can take on and move forward without having difficulties and no longer having the support from the staff. Some of the services, if we have to turn around and hire a new personnel to take over that task in the new in one of the districts or two of the districts, would require advertising, filling the position, and training while we're still flying the plane. So if we were able to do it and just, you know, you do it, you take a month, you do it, you turn around and you're good to go. That's not the case. We're still doing our everyday tasks and having to train someone to make sure that they're able to take over. A lot of these shared services came about because we're short-staffed. To think that we'll be able to fill them easily, I think is the difficulty that we're having to plan ahead.
Thank you, Lucy.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? The
Well, I
motion on the
guess-
floor still stands.
I would withdraw the motion then.
I think
Because I don't
once some
think-
motions on the floor, Toby, I think we have to take a vote.
Oh, I can't withdraw my own motion?
I don't believe so, now that it's been seconded, right?
Okay. I guess my only thing I would say is perhaps we go in with an idea, and as much as I don't like it, just see what we get back from the administration on these contracts. Because I feel like, because one of the problems we're going to have is I doubt these are all going to line up exactly on the same year, right? I mean, there's multiple contracts running in multiple directions. And maybe it's just something we go back to Valley Unified with and kind of explore with the rest of our Valley Unified folks and see what we can agree to there. Maybe we don't want to be hemmed in at all. I mean, it might be something more complex. It might be that we extract ourselves from one contract because we have an opportunity to do so this year on something that we don't necessarily want to share, or we keep some others going. I mean, it's not as black and white as pulling a plug, I don't think. I think some of these things we can continue to share, and some of them we may not want to. And some of them we want to share outside of Valley Unified. I mean, we have multiple options. So I'm moving more towards Sarah's position, where I don't know if setting fixed dates on the whole shebang is necessarily helpful. I mean, there's so many moving pieces here, but at the same time, I mean, the longer it continues to go on its own, the harder it's going to be to do anything about it. I mean, that's what I'm weighing, is that the more we do this, the more entrenched it's going to become. And I don't know. So that's my hesitation on my own motion, is given that I don't know all the facts, I don't even know what to do with it.
Ben, with the Valley Unified Board, had we not formed an ILA committee?
We had not. It was going to be a recommendation. However, I think we agreed that we wanted to have those discussions in public at a Valley Unified full board level, rather than have a subcommittee make those determinations. So we have not.
Keith, do you think 9 people are too many to have that discussion with?
Keith is frozen. I think Keith. Oh, he's there. Okay.
Back. Okay, so we have no further discussion. Sounds
Keith, I
like
asked the question when you froze. Do you think that the 9-member Valley Unified Board would be too cumbersome to have that discussion? I think they could handle it. It felt like we were able to discuss it pretty well in the last meeting.
I agree. You know, like Ben said, we've got the term is one issue, withdrawal is a separate issue. We've got a whole lot of little things that we need to work on, and I think Valley Unified Board meetings are the place to do it. For us to nail down something right now where we're really not 100% sure what our partners want to do, I don't want to lock us in, as Sarah said. So I think we'll just go ahead and end discussion. Doesn't sound like the motion's gonna pass, but I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna go ahead and take a roll call vote. Toby, how do you vote on the motion to reduce the term from 25 years to 2 and no more than 3 years?
No. I vote
Good.
against.
Mr. Toby Johnner votes no. Mrs. Sarah Ashley, how do you vote?
No.
Okay. Ms. Fuller,
No.
Ms. Lozier,
No.
that's
And
everybody.
Keith, to keep it
Motion
clean,
fails.
I'd like to put another motion forward.
Okay, what would
If
that
I
be?
may. Just the board agrees that reducing the term is something that that would benefit us, period. From 35 years or whatever it is.
So your motion is to reduce the term of
Reduce
the
the term
current
from what's
Valley
in the
Unified
original.
Agreement.
Yep.
Very good. Do we have a second? Sarah has the second on that motion. Any further discussion? Very good. Ms. Lozier, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Mr. Jandro,
Yes.
and Mrs. Ashley.
Yes.
Very good. Motion passes. I believe underneath that same item, Ben, we had also talked about the makeup of the board.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, if it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna skip over that one and talk about withdrawal first, because we're kind of talking about the same thing when we talk about term. So I'm just gonna shoot over to withdrawal. Right now, your current agreement, your ILA does not allow any member to withdraw until 2043. So you can't get out. After 2043, a withdrawing member must give 2 years notice and be approved by 2/3 of the membership. That does not include the board members withdrawing from the withdrawing SAU. So 2043, if SAD27 wanted to withdraw, it would be up to Madawaska and 33 to allow them to withdraw. So that's basically how the current language goes. So my initial I'm not giving a recommendation, but there's just some options that I want the board to consider. If you do, and I think all three parties again are understanding that withdrawal language is probably ridiculous now that we don't have a school that we're tied to. But I would just give a couple of points that if a withdrawal was going to happen, I do agree with the 2 years notice, but I also agree with a notification date that should come. And I mentioned December 31st as that notification date. And once you give that notification, it's 2 school years after that notification is what I'm recommending. And that's based on what Lucy and Giselle were talking about with how difficult it is to undo a lot of those shared programs. 2 years is really cutting it close. So giving that December 31st date and then 2 years after. I also did cite the regional school unit withdrawal process, as we know pretty well here in 27, that already exists. So if you wanted to point something in statutes and say there's already a withdrawal process that exists, you could look at the SAU withdrawal process and say, why don't we just follow that process? And that's a whole bunch of steps for those of us that have initiated that with one of our member communities before. So that's just food for thought for all of you.
Ben, if we were to follow the statute recommendations for withdrawal, if this were an RSU, would that not require us to form a withdrawal committee?
Correct.
Or would that be just the withdrawing community?
If we were to shadow that withdrawal process, we'd have to form a withdrawal committee. It wouldn't necessarily fit exactly the RSU language in the law, because that says a municipality withdrawing, but we would have to do an SAU withdrawing. So we'd have to modify it a little bit to meet our needs. We wouldn't fit in the law, but we could essentially shadow it.
I would just say that for me, it makes more sense just to have, I think the December 31st deadline makes sense because it gives everybody the warning. And I think it just a 2 years notice to the other members. It keeps us all honest, and I think it keeps us working together. Because if somebody's feeling like they're being shut out, they can say, you know what, we're out of here. And then we can have discussions about what we need to do to make it better.
Yeah.
And part of the problem is the way we get things set up is nobody can leave. So if somebody's annoyed or put out, they can't even take their ball and go home. And I think having the option for all three of us, this isn't just about 27, this is Madawaska, this is Frenchville too, and this and again. I think it just makes sense to be able to say, you know what, I don't think this is working anymore. I think we'll have less of a chance of hearing that if we make it easier.
Toby did mention during the Val Unified meeting too, that a member might have to withdraw because of necessity. They might have something that happens in their SAU that's very drastic. You know, a major employer shuts down, or an exodus of X amount of students or whatever, and you have no choice, but you can't afford those services. So it might be out of necessity, not only out of, you know, desire.
Okay, before we get into any further discussion, does somebody want to make a motion?
I'd like to move to suggest that we I guess work towards a withdrawal request notification of December 31st with 2 years notice. December 31st for 8 years with 2 years notice to the other members of the Valley Unified, that any member can withdraw with 2 years notice on December 31st.
Second.
Okay, just for clarification, that's after the year of notification, Toby?
2 years after the year of notification, yes. So I think it would be 2.5 years.
Okay.
Am I understanding that correctly, Ben?
That's correct.
Okay.
Toby made the motion, Ms. Fuller seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Ashley, how do you feel about this?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Lozier,
Yes.
Mr. Jandro,
Yes.
Ms. Fuller.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, the last thing, going back to board membership, this might be one that takes a little more negotiation, if you will. We did discuss a couple of options with the Val Unified Board. And my recommendation was to move to a membership that matches your cost sharing. So SAD27 has essentially 50% of the cost share. They should have 50% of the board membership, so on and so forth. Option one presented was a 10-member board, 5 from SAD27, 5 being the 50%, 3 from Madawaska, representing 30%, and 2 from SAD33, representing their 20%. The discussion about that was that we are a 7-member board here at SAD27. Having 5 appointed members is essentially almost all of the board. So that could be problematic. Option 2 was to reduce that, to cut that in half. So do a 5-member board, 3 from SAD27, 2 from Madawaska, 1 from SAD 33. Excuse me, that would be a 6-member board, not a 5-member board. 6-member board, 3 from 27, 2 from Madawaska, 1 from 33. The representative from SAD 33 felt like being one lonely member might be daunting from 33 and not having somebody to collaborate with. So that was a concern about that. And then the final option was to either remain a 9-member board or some other membership board, but have weighted votes. And this is actually something that exists with some RSUs. They have weighted votes. So you just have to do the math with each vote. If you were to remain a 9-member board, and SAD27 has 50% of the cost share, their 3 votes should equal 50% of the total votes. So each vote would be like a 16.66% weight on the vote. Madawaska, with their 30% of the cost share, their 3 votes would equal 10% each. That's easy. And then 27, their 3 votes would be 20. And that would be about 6.66. So you could do that. It's just a mathematical game at that point. And obviously, when developing the ILA, whenever the Valley Unified Board comes up to an agreement with what they like in the ILA, we would have to work with our legal team to figure out, all right, what constitutes a supermajority vote on certain things and what's a regular vote. I think that's something that's going to have to be ironed out. But those are 3 options that were presented: the 10-member board, the 6-member board, and then the weighted vote situation. So I'll open that up for discussion.
Yeah, from what I gathered at our meeting, item B, or option 2, would not have been palatable for SAD 33 to just have the 1 member go in there and be able to make decisions for their whole district was not a position they wanted to be in. So, and for us, I mean, I can only speak for myself, where I don't think having 5 of our SAD27 board members show up to these Valley Unified meetings, I think that's a little bit much. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but personally, I think option 3 is probably our best option. With the weighted votes, we stay with the same amount of members on that board as we've had all along. I would support option 3.
I would agree. I think that it just makes the most sense to have weighted votes rather than have one district with 1 member and the other district with 5 of us.
I agree. I think that 3rd option with the weighted votes makes the most sense. Plus, math is fun.
I agree after the math is fun part, but the 3rd option is probably the best one, in my opinion.
Toby, do you have anything to add to that? We're making a motion.
I think option 3 makes the most sense. We could even consider, there doesn't necessarily need to be 9 board members. We could do 6 or whatever. I mean, anything's possible if we didn't want to bring in all 9, depending on what the rest of the crew felt. I think the only pitfall, and I like the weighted piece, but I'm going to put it out there. The only pitfall with the weighted piece is we've always kind of rounded to make our numbers work better. And we're going to have to be really clear on how we round things going into it. Because if I'm not mistaken, MSAD33 doesn't have 20%. They got 18. And the 33, and Madawaska's got like 33, and we got like 51. And I think we're gonna have to have a talk with our partners about what all this means. Not because I want to be difficult, but because if the population shifts, at what point do we readjust those numbers? If we're already rounding them at different variant, like, you know what I mean? Am I making sense to anyone but myself right now?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're gonna have to set a time period where we establish that maybe at the beginning of the school year based on our enrollment. Is that correct, Ben?
Well, something that Lucy does every year when she's building the Valley Unified budget is that she reviews the total student population and evaluations. So that's calculated in budget season before approving the budget. So that's probably a natural time to look at that and make sure that those voting shares are appropriate.
Because if I'm not
And we
mistaken,
wouldn't
Ben, I think right now we're at a little over 50%, right?
I'll let
Sorry,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Yeah, I think Lucy had just looked at that earlier today. I think you're. I think we are. SAD27 is, I think, 51% or 50, maybe 52. A really good Zoom host would have Jeopardy theme music right now.
While Lucy or whoever's looking for something, I do know that the statutes do contain language for reapportionment for RSUs, for example, or SADs or what have you. And there's probably, I haven't had a chance to look at it real quick, but there's probably guidelines on how often you can do it and how you can do it.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern, Giselle, is that I don't want to go into this saying, oh, we're only 50%. And then I don't want it to look like we're playing games.
Yeah.
And we turn out to be 52%, you know, and I don't want to be that way. I want to be,
Yeah.
I want to cooperate, not fight.
Yeah.
So that's all.
I agree with you, Toby, and I don't know if it's based on the decade-long census that, you know, however that's decided. I guess it's critical how it is set up in the beginning. Also, don't forget that in the ILA, there's already a clause that says if one community, if their valuation or student count or something changes the formula by 8%, there's language there that would have to match whatever changes you guys make.
There's a safety
Yeah.
net there.
Right, the
I
safety.
think we're going to be, yeah. And then we talked about the 7/9 release valve too. So we've got all sorts of nice little analogies kicking around.
Yeah. And the calculation for the Valley Unified budget, half of it is based on attending pupils. And I get the numbers from the October 1st count of the previous fall. And the other 50% is based on percent evaluation. So for the 22-23 budget year, SAD27 has 50.7%. SAD33 is 15.74. And Madawaska is 33.56.
I mean, knowing those, we wouldn't have to round if we're weighting stuff. It could just be at every whatever budget season or every 2 budget seasons that's just reevaluated and then the equation is reset, right? Isn't that easy enough?
If you like math.
It's easy enough. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about this up front. This is going to be part of the discussion because I don't want it to be something that's, I don't want it to look like a bait and switch, Sarah. That's all. That's the only reason I raised it.
So it sounds like the board is more in favor of some kind of weighted vote movement.
I guess I would move to explore further a weighted vote as have the representatives explore a weighted vote system with Valley Unified.
I'll second.
Moved by Toby, seconded by Sarah. Any further discussion? Okay, Ms. Pooler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Pooler votes yes. Ms. Lozier?
Yes.
Yes. Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Jandro?
Yes.
All in favor? Motion passes.
When I meet with 33 in Madawaska, I'll have these same suggestions and summaries, essentially copy paste so that they're getting the same information and weighing in the same way that you all did.
Okay, I think that wraps it up for old business. Item 9, new business. Items for information, retirements. Ben?
It isn't so. We have a retirement announcement. After 33 years in high school, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's pretty sad when you see your kids graduate from high school and college, and I'm still in high school. It is my intent to retire on the 4th of November, 2022. With that being said, I will not see SAD27 stuck. If you are unable to find a replacement, I'd be willing to work per diem until one can be found. I have learned a lot working for SAD27, but I can honestly say these last 2 years with COVID have been the strangest and the toughest. My hat goes off to you and your administration for pulling us through this. Sincerely, Rudy Martin. I would need a motion.
I think whenever we think SAD27, we think of Rudy Martin sometimes, a lot of times. He's there for everything. He's there for our budget meetings. He's there sometimes for after school events, extracurricular events. He's been there since I was in high school. When was his start date, Ben?
He said it's been 33 years, so those good at math can figure that out.
89.
Sounds about right.
Definitely going to be a huge loss.
If we don't make the motion, does he have to stay?
I think so.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Ms. Pooler, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Lozier? Ms. Lozier, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Jandro?
Yes.
Motion passes reluctantly. Thank you, Mr. Rudy Martin. On to resignation.
We have a resignation of a cook aide at CHS. To whom it may concern, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as assistant cook at Fort Kent Community High School, effective December 22, 2021. I appreciate the opportunities you have offered me to grow both professionally and personally. Please let me know how I can be of help during the transition period. And this is from Lisa Terrio.
So moved.
Moved by Toby, seconded by Ms. Pooler. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mrs. Ashley?
Yes.
Ms. Pooler?
Yes.
Ms. Lozier?
Yes.
Mr. Jandro?
Yes.
All in favor? Looks like we have a second resignation. Ben?
Yep, we have a cook aide at Fort Kent Elementary. And I apologize, I do not have the letter this is a resignation from Samantha Boucher, who was with us for a short time. And her resignation was effective immediately when she submitted it.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Toby, seconded by Ms. Pooler. Any discussion? What's going on with our cook-aids, Ben?
It's a tough job. It's not the highest paying job. I know that Lisa was offered a position at Northern Maine Medical Center that she couldn't turn down for the pay. And although we've done pretty well in the last negotiations to raise those, it's tough with those wages. It just is.
All right. Very good. Roll call vote, Mrs. Ashley,
Yes.
Ms. Pooler,
Yes.
Mr. Jandro,
Yes.
Ms. Lozier. Motion passes. Accept the resignation. Item 3, resignation of VRMS CHS French teacher.
I do have a letter. I am writing to you in gratitude for allowing me to to be my truest self while teaching at Fort Kent Community High School and Valley Rivers Middle School for over a decade. I have remained loyal to my inner energy, my quirkiness of my teachings, leadership style, my inner drive to make the culture of my classroom a welcoming and stress-free environment for all learning styles. I do believe I have achieved success in reaching hundreds of students' lives and changing the way in which they accept each other. Creating a culture in my classroom that has made learning fun and engaging was my primary goal every single day. During this phase of my life, my energy is needed elsewhere. I need to make significant lifestyle change due to several reasons. My intuition is telling me to stop using the classroom as a vehicle to reach others. It is time to use for a different arena. For this reason and several others, I've chosen to resign as a French teacher in MSAD27 for VRMS and CHS effective at the end of the workday on January 28th, 2022. This wasn't an easy decision, to say the least. Sincerely, Margaret Guimau.
We have a motion to accept Ms. Guimau's resignation.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Isabel, moved by Sarah, seconded by Sarah. Any discussion? Mr. Jandro, how do you vote?
Approve.
Mrs. Ashley?
Yes.
Ms. Lozier?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Motion passes. Transfers. We have one transfer to report on, Ben.
Yeah, we do have a transfer of a Fort Kent Elementary ed tech who's transferring to Valley Unified Continuing Ed. This is Selena McBriarty, and she'll be working as, or she has been working as an early childhood aide at the Chippy Center. So just wanted to notify the board that we did have that transfer.
Do we normally make motions to approve transfers, Ben?
Not transfers. No.
Something we've ever done. Moving on to new hires.
I did send you a letter this morning. I hope that you got it and were able to take a look at it. There were interviews that were conducted late last week. And by the end of the day, Friday, the interview committee for our VRMS CHS French teacher, which included Mr. Coletta, Mr. Doucet, and Robert Deg, our other French teacher. They are recommending Connie Cloutier, who is currently the French teacher at Wisdom Middle High School, and she's also our elementary French integrator in our 3 Valley Unified elementary schools. They are recommending her based on her references, her experience. She has 18 years of teaching experience French in all levels, elementary, middle, and high school.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Sarah,
Second,
second by Abby. Any discussion? Ms. Lozay, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Jandro,
Approve.
Mrs. Ashley,
Yes.
and Ms. Fuller.
yes.
Motion passes. Item 2, FKES EdTech.
Just do want to mention, based on the previous item, we were very lucky to have a French teacher of that caliber in such a short amount of time. So kudos to Mr. Coletta and the interview committee for getting that going. And although it's very, very difficult to see Ms. Guimont leaving, we're pleasantly surprised that we have a very qualified candidate to take over. Moving on to the Fort Kent Elementary educational technicians, I do have 2 recommendations for you. Again, the interviews for these occurred late last week. The first recommendation is for Michelle Gendreau, who will serve as a special education one-on-one at Fort Kent Elementary School. Michelle has been substituting at FKES for a while now. Prior to that, she was a medical receptionist for 13 years. She's reported as being having a great demeanor and being a good fit at Fort Kent Elementary School. So the first recommendation is for Michelle Gendreau.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Sarah, seconded by Abby. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Jandro, are you in favor?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Lozier,
Yes.
Mrs. Ashley?
Yes.
All in favor, motion approved.
The second recommendation is for Chelsea Zion. Chelsea was working for us in previous years. She left this November to take a position at ACAP, and immediately after taking the position, wanted to come back to Fort Kent Elementary. So we're pleased to offer her that chance to come back as a special ed one-on-one at Fort Kent Elementary School.
We have a motion to accept Ms. Zion as a new hire EdTech one-on-one, special EdTech one-on-one.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Fuller,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Ashley. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Jandro, are you in favor?
I am.
Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Lozier,
Yes.
and Mrs. Ashley.
Yes.
Motion passes. Mr. Sarah, we have VRMS CHS Assistant Theater Coach, is that correct?
And as I mentioned, this was something that was added to the to one of the schedules in the contract. As you know, our theater director, Mr. Clapp, is no spring chicken, and he's looking at not only getting help because of how demanding the productions are, but he's also looking at, you know, trying to groom for the future as well, so that the drama program does not go when he decides to step away. Although I don't feel like he'll ever step away, but you know, that is part of the plan. So they are recommending, and this is the hiring committee, Mr. Coletta, Mr. Doucette, and Mr. Clapp are recommending Justin Taggett for the assistant theater coach. Mr. Taggett has several years of experience working with students as a substitute teacher. He is substitute teaching almost every day here at CHS. and has experience as well with Fort Kent Channel 4 and their crew as an audiovisual individual. So they are recommending Justin Taggett for this position.
We have a motion to accept. Mr. Taggett,
Full moved.
moved by Ms. Fuller,
Second,
seconded by Mrs. Ashley. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Jondra, how do you vote?
Approve.
Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Ashley,
yes.
Ms. Lozier.
Yes.
Motion passes. On to current openings.
You see, we have some coaching openings. We have varsity softball coach, varsity softball assistant coach, and the high school tennis coach, which are all openings right now. I do believe soon we will look to fill our district head custodian, although we don't have to move too quickly. Mr. Martin is with us until November. I did ask that he is part of that process of helping us find his replacement. So we'll open that position most likely in-house when the time comes, and then we'll move forward from there. That's all we have for current openings, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moving on to the 2022-2023 school calendar approval.
This is the draft of next school year's calendar. It looks very similar to this school year. What we do is we survey the staff every November and then send out follow-up surveys if things are unclear. So what this draft represents is the majority of staff's thoughts and opinions based on, when they want to start the school year, when they look to end the school year, when they would like to have, if they would like to have early releases, if so, when are the best times during the week or during the month to have them. Also, when is the best time to have a fall workshop, a winter workshop, a spring workshop. And then we also survey the farmers, the local farmers, about what weeks they choose are best for harvest. So that represents what our farmers are thinking as well. So it does represent the majority of respondents to those surveys based on all things. So you can see that because we are trying again to end the school year before that third week of June, we had to step back and provide the first workshop day for staff at the Friday of that week in August, and then do the second workshop on a Monday. So students would be starting on a Tuesday. Your Fort Kent Elementary and CHS VRMS staff voted to have harvest break straight across the board. So with this draft, there would be no breaking for harvest for any of the SAD27 staff or students. They would all be recognizing the harvest break, and then so on and so forth. Everything else falls into place. It's a 89-day split, 87-day on the semesters, essentially 43 to 45 days per quarter, with the total of 176 and 182 for staff. So that is the draft of the calendar. Any questions?
We have a motion to approve the 2022-23 calendar as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Toby. Who had the second?
Sarah did.
Sarah? Very good.
Maybe
Any further?
maybe it was Isabel.
I'm sorry, I heard Sarah. Isabel seconded that motion to the calendar. Any discussion? Any questions for Ben? Seeing none. Let's start with Mrs. Ashley. Do you approve?
Yes.
Mr. Jandro?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Logan?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item of business, MSAD27 strategic plan.
So I did push out a survey last week. To date, we have 167 responses to that survey. It asks, what stakeholder group the individuals represent. The majority of our respondents are parents of students, second by staff members, and then we have community members at large, and then a mixed bag of other responses. We have students who have responded, and this is based on what they felt are the top 5 guiding beliefs out of the set of guiding beliefs that we provided or what they wrote in. So we are collecting that. We're going to have some good data to share out with our strategic planning committee when we do convene that committee and start discussing. And this is just to help me. There's some good feedback with comments that folks have left. So we'll have a lot to get started with our conversations based around those guiding beliefs. And those essentially are just statements such as, we believe in creating a culture of innovation, redesigning the learning experience. We believe in educating the whole child. We believe in community collaboration. So you can see a whole set of things that we essentially aspire to do, and some we do better than others, but we're trying to gauge what is most important out of those. There are some respondents that have left others, so we can look at those as well. But I did want the board to know that we are gathering that feedback. I do want to get the board's thoughts about whether or not we should, as a school, push that out to students. Usually I don't do that unless we want to ensure that we get student feedback. There are some students who have seen this on social media and have responded to it, but not large numbers of students. So I did want to get your thoughts about pushing that out, having Mr. Coletta, Mr. Doucette, and possibly even at the elementary level, pushing maybe a memo out to parents so that they can go respond on their students' behalf as well. The parents can. So I just wanted your thoughts on that. Or some other ways to get this out so we get more data.
I mean, I'm fine if it goes out to students. I really don't. I don't think it would be a bad thing.
One thing that we've done too before is we've had some group discussions with students. So we bring in 10 random students and just have a discussion with them and let them weigh in that way as well. So that's also another option that we have. Another thing that we would need to discuss is the makeup of the strategic planning committee. And so that I can start reaching out to those folks and inviting them to an initial meeting. And so there's that. And then whether or not we should be having those strategic planning committees live in person, Zoom, or a combination of both in order to be flexible. But I think what we should start with is who's going to be on this strategic planning committee.
Ben, I think you've thrown out or presented some options, probably based on previous experience. Could you just kind of start with that as a baseline and maybe add to it? You have that data available.
Maybe what we could do is, I mean, we don't have to vote on it. So maybe what we can do is just kick some ideas around, like in an email thread.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to see more community involvement. I found the list to be school heavy. And there's nothing wrong with having folks from the school there, I think, but it'd be good to have some shareholders from the community. Maybe go to some new wells, ones that we haven't tapped before. You know, it feels like we often end up with the same crew, whatever the problem is, and it'd be nice to see us spread out a little bit. That was the reason for my suggestion that we might want to kick it around. So I'd be really interested to hear, like, if we just put something out to the board members via email, like, who do you think would be good shareholders? Like, what positions, what folks in the community do we think we want to see? I think that would be helpful to give me some idea. And I'm going to be completely honest. I mean, I've been pushing hard for the strategic plan thing, and my wife reminded me that I'm up for re-election. So if I'm the only one who really is that vested in this, it may be worth just putting this off until after March, till we know who our board's going to be, because we have two members that are going to be up for re-election right now. So I think we may see some change. We may not. I don't know. But maybe we can just kick it around online, bounce some ideas of who we think would be good members, either generally or specific, and see what we come up with. And then maybe take a vote on it next time we meet. What do you think of that?
That works.
Ben, I mean, I think in the past we've had, you know, our normal community stakeholders, such as some of the large business owners and small business owners, some from the university, the hospital. I think we can have a good mix of parents, businesses, university, maybe government, college, mixed in with staff and a few administrators. I think as long as we take a well-balanced approach, we can come back and present something to the board at a up and coming meeting.
Yep.
Maybe not necessarily next month, but just keep that in the back of your head.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I would be looking at. I don't know how everybody else feels.
So maybe we take Toby's suggestion and I can send out an email thread and we can bounce around some ideas. Then I can put a draft together and then we can take it from there. Toby, are you suggesting we hold off on board appointments to this committee until we know who's going to be on the board after the elections?
No, I was kind of just suggesting we kick the whole discussion down until after the elections, because I think it's going to feels like we have enough on our plate right now. If it's not on fire, I mean, we've got the changes going on Valley Unified. If these are my last 3 meetings, it doesn't feel like it would be a good use of my time personally. We got other things we got to take care of. And it'll be there in March. So that's all I'm thinking is, with COVID and with the Valley Unified changes, it feels like there's enough on fire right now. And I know I was the one pushing this, but I'm just taking a step back, and I mean, everything's crazy. I did not expect Valley Unified to take the turn it did last month. And I feel like that really should bear our attention currently. I think we need to figure out what that relationship is, because it's going to help inform us of what we do as a SAD. That's where I am.
I agree. I think the Valley Unified decisions are going to help mold what our own strategic plan are going to become. So maybe this will be a good use of our time to make sure we have a good comprehensive committee. So we'll spend time just trying to bounce ideas about who would best serve on that committee, because it might take months to get responses from potential committee members on whether or not they can commit.
Absolutely agree. Valley Unified is going to take up enough of our time, and once we kind of get settled into where we're going with that, then we'll be able to focus more on our local strategic plan. I think the next item of business is the item B, appropriation of additional state funding.
That's correct. And I'm going to put something on my screen. And Lucy, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot to explain what we're looking at.
Nope. As part of the budget process last year for the 21-22 budget year, the state had initially issued an ED 279 in January. And then as we were pretty much set to go to the budget in May or June, they announced that there was additional state funding, yet it wasn't finalized until July. So by then we already had a budget. What we had put in our warrants was the Article 17 that you see on Ben's screen, which basically says, gives the board the authority to create a reserve account and or reduce local tax assessment in the event that we received additional state funding. So we did receive additional state funds. We received an extra $236,202.67. So at this point, the Department of Education wants the board to actually put numbers to what they decide to do with this article. So do they want to put all or a portion of it to a reserve account, all or a portion of it to reduce taxes, or one or the other? So at this point, that's what we need. And then if you decide to reduce state taxes, or not the tax assessments to the towns, in which year would you want to do it? Right now, I would suggest we're well into the 21-22 school year. The towns have pretty much all allocated their taxes anyways. So I would recommend that we tackle it for the 22-23 school year, budget year, if that's the case. But we have to get a number of to basically divvy up that 236,000. In terms of a reserve account, when you create a reserve account, you can create a reserve account that's general or a specific one. So examples of a reserve account could be to address facilities projects, or to be set aside to reduce local taxes in future years, that kind of thing. You could set one up to go towards technology, go towards for whatever you can think of in terms of reserve. It basically allows you to set those monies aside and make them available when you need them. When you do decide to use them, the board then say in November, you've decided you need to use those funds, the board then gets a vote to take money out of those reserve accounts. It's not something that I decide on a whim and be able to take them out. The board actually has to give authority at that time to take them out and spend them.
Lucy, what is the total amount again?
$236,202.67.
So what does the board think about that?
My first thoughts are price of oil and where we stand with that, and the price of fuel and the biomass. Have we taken an additional hit from the price of oil this winter, Lucy?
Right now, the prices are close to $3. They range between $2.75, around $2.75 per gallon, and both for the gas and the diesel. So that would be a good one as well.
I know in the past, I think this has only happened maybe once in my previous 10, 11 years now, where we've had additional monies that I can remember. I think we've in the past allocated 50% to go back to the towns and 50% towards education. But just my opinion, I feel like I'd like to hear what everybody else has to say first, but I think this is a good amount to allocate towards next year's, I don't know, necessarily allocated towards next year's budget, or to send it back to the town for next next year. What does everybody else think?
I would agree with you, Keith. I think that makes the most sense with all the unknowns as well that are going on this year and could be next year.
I agree with you as well.
Obi, what are your thoughts?
Just not, what were you suggesting we do?
Well, I mean, we're well into this school year, and I think allocating the extra funds towards next year's budget or offsetting or local assessments, however you want to word that, I think that would be appropriate.
Just rolling
that
it all
local-
into next year and we decide what we're gonna do with the next year.
Well, basically using it to offset the local contribution.
Oh, 100% of it.
That was my thought. Since we're already halfway through this school year.
Just for clarification, a reserve fund is not just for that 1 year. It would stay in there as long as you don't need it. I'm not sure if you interpreted that as being just a 1 year reserve.
So if they needed 80,000 next year, they could take 80,000 out. If they needed 50,000 the following year, they could take that out. Is that what you mean, Lucy? Yeah.
Yes, if you establish a reserve fund of 100,000 and then in 1 year you need 40,000, the 60,000 carries forward. It just keeps, it stays in the reserve. It's basically a savings account or CD that you set aside and set aside for emergency purposes. If you don't use it, the full 100,000 would stay in that reserve until you need it. That was just a clarification. I'm not suggesting you do anything different than what you're looking to do.
In order to use your funds from a reserve account, you have to go back to town meeting and get it approved.
No, I think in this case, it's just the board.
For an SAD?
I believe so, yes.
I would be inclined to put it into reserve account to offset instead of just setting it forward as an offset. That way, if this year it works out well, if there's federal funds and we're doing okay, we don't have to raise taxes, or we don't increase our budget significantly, I would be inclined to save it for a year when we do, when we have something we have to do and it's going to cost us more. I think I'd be more inclined to put it into a reserve for future offsets as opposed to just putting it to next year for offsets.
Again, this article gives you the opportunity to do one or both. You can choose a combination.
What do you think, Keith?
I'd be comfortable with putting half of it in reserve. And then the other half, as I stated earlier, offsetting taxes, I think, is important.
I guess what I would say, Keith, is I want to make sure I understand this is that if we put whatever $200 and some thousand in reserve to offset taxes, we could still put half of it next year towards offsetting taxes, depending on what our budget looks like. Whereas if we offset the taxes with half of it, then we're stuck with that regardless of what happens, whatever funding sources we may have this in the next year. So that's why I'm suggesting putting it into a reserve for offsetting taxes. That way we can play it by ear once we know what our financial situation looks like next year, instead of putting it forward not knowing what's coming next year. That's the only reason. I'm not trying to be difficult, but I think it makes more sense to put it somewhere we can use it for that purpose, but when we need it, not necessarily automatically.
You also have the option of creating 2 or more separate reserve accounts. You can create one with one purpose, or you can create several with different purposes and different amounts.
I think creating the reserve account is a good idea. It gives us the flexibility coming into our budget season. if I understand that correctly. Lucy.
Yes.
It doesn't lock us into anything
Nope.
at the moment.
The only thing that locks you in is if you create a reserve account for a specific purpose. And then say you created a reserve account specifically to deal with the heating, the changes in heating prices. And then you determined at budget time that, oh gee, we really need this to reduce taxes. You would not be able to withdraw it from the reserve for heating purposes and use it to reduce taxes.
But if we put it in a general reserve, we'd be able to use it for whatever was needed at the time.
That's correct. Yes.
Keith, how would you feel about half into a general reserve and half into a reserve for reducing taxes?
I would be okay with that. You want to go ahead and make the motion?
I move to move half of it into a general reserve and half it into a reserve for reducing, for giving to the towns, or however we need to do that, reducing taxes.
I'll second.
Toby made the motion. Abby seconded it. Do we have any further discussion? Sarah, you're on here somewhere. Haven't heard from you yet.
It's just trying to follow along. I know we had created a line item in the budget maybe, or we had kind of set a goal for doing some facilities stuff over the next few years. And so,
Yes. And what that is, Sarah, is we currently, in this is the first year that we've done that. We've set aside $100,000, just a general amount that we can tackle projects throughout the year versus in prior years, we were assigning specific dollar amounts to specific projects. And we found that very difficult for the timelines that we can tackle some of these projects that we were unable to accomplish them when we wanted to, or if there was a price change, that it didn't give us the flexibility of doing something different. So by putting in a fixed dollar amount and just as general for facilities projects, it allows us to tackle these as we need them throughout the year and move on to something different if we find that the project that we had planned is either way too costly or just cannot be accommodated in the time frame that we need it. So I do plan on including $100,000 again in this year's budget. We also have a contingency in the event that, say, a boiler breaks down. There's always a contingency amount for those emergency items that we just cannot put off.
and then worst case scenario, this reserve account could always fund something if we needed it to,
Correct.
which I like it.
Anybody else have anything to add? Isabel?
No, I'm just kind of following along, trying to process everything.
Very good. I don't think we have any further discussion.
Yeah, just as a note, once we establish a reserve account, every year we can choose to add some. Once we get to the end of towards the end of the school year with the carry forward amounts, you can always choose to add some to the reserve accounts once they've created. So that's always a good thing.
Very good. Ms. Loze, how do you vote?
And just the vote on this article is to set aside half of the additional state funding in a general reserve account and the other half towards a reserve to reduce future tax assessments.
I believe Toby made the motion. Is that correct? Did we have a
Correct.
motion?
Yes, yep.
Okay, very
Toby
good.
and Abby, yep.
Okay, Ms. Loze, do we have your approval?
Yes.
Ms. Fuller?
Yep.
Mrs. Ashley?
Yes.
Mr. Toby Jondro?
Yes.
All in favor, motion approved.
Thank you.
Okay, motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA section 405-6D for labor contract discussions between MSAD27 and the Teamsters Local 340 IT bargaining unit. Do I have a second?
Second.
Abigail seconded it. Toby, you in favor? Entering into executive session?
Sorry, yes.
Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Lozier?
Yes.
Ms. Ashley?
Yes.
Very good. We're in executive session.
Sorry, can I clarify who made the motion?
I made the motion. Chair can do that. I
Okay,
think.
Some of you are going to get invited to executive session room. Some of you will not. And then we'll come back out after the executive session. So please just wait for your invite. And the rest of you are free to go because we'll only be reporting out on executive session stuff. Have a good evening. For the public, we'll come back and report out on executive session shortly.